Today we're going to go over the top 11 4 stars in all of Genshin Impact, and although I will be considering them mostly at C6, I'll be very careful to mention which ones are good at lower constellations so that you can determine who is worth building for you. Genshin has a reputation of having launch 4 stars that are as strong as some of the other strongest characters in the game, so let's find out whether this is still true and if any of the newer 4 stars can keep up. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Also, before we get into the list, leave your predictions for the top 11 down below in the comments. Number 11 is Charlotte. She was released on the same banner as Furina, and with good reason. Without Furina, Charlotte would be a niche melt enabler for characters like Arlecchino, maybe some offbeat Diluc teams, and a pretty okay unit for some freeze teams, but definitely not top list material. Given Furina, however, Charlotte is a great character to utilize for whenever the freeze reaction is valuable, or whenever your team could use some really powerful healing, because believe me when I say it that Charlotte feels like one of the strongest healers in the game. She heals so much so fast and is able to front load Furina's stacks to give her max buff very quickly, and is also just extremely comfy. Your team can go from almost completely dead to completely healthy in basically no time, so she's a perfect partner for Furina, like I said, especially when the cryo reaction is valuable. What holds her back is that the cryo reaction is often not that valuable. Freeze isn't that incredible of a reaction, and so she isn't always the most valuable bring. The second thing that holds her back is her insane energy requirement, often needing energy recharge sands and ideally Favonius Codex as well. This can be alleviated if you have her Constellation 4, but her energy needs are still redonkulous. If you want to be able to run something like Thrilling Tales on her, you're going to need massive energy recharge pieces. But if you can pull it off, it can make her an alright replacement to Bennett on some Furina teams, such as Wanderer, Navia, etc. I think her most meta team is probably Novelette. She's a great support for him when freeze is good, and pretty much eliminates your need for a dedicated freeze team. Plus, you'll never need to build insane ER for Thrilling Tales, and you can just get away with Favonius Codex to lower energy requirements for Furina. But all in all, she's a very flexible healer, best for Furina teams, but has some other teams as well. And with hopefully future cryo buffs, I could see Charlotte getting better. Number 10 is going to be Yao Yao. Yao Yao is probably the least constellation dependent character on this list. She doesn't have useless constellations, but just picking up a copy at C0 will allow her to function completely and fully on any of your teams. Her most meta teams are going to be as a healer for Aggravate or a healer in Nilou Bloom teams. Furina Nilou teams are one of my favorites, especially if you happen to have the key for your Nilou, but it's still good anyways. And although I definitely prefer Baiju, Yao Yao is really not that far behind for Nilou teams, and also not that far for most Aggravate teams as well. Some people can use her for burning teams. I've seen burning Risley with Yao Yao, but I think Aggravate and Nilou are her main bread and butter. Her biggest upside is her AoE Dendro application with her skill, which, while not huge, is enough to refresh Nahida's skill, which requires some other form of Dendro application to keep consistent, as well as the AoE proccing of Aggravate, which is what allows her to be used in those Aggravate teams. Being Dendro, it's obviously a very powerful element to have. I have coined a special team called Hopper Bloom, where you want to run Yao Yao as the healer, Furina as the Hydro, Kuki as the Electro, and you just hop around. Not the greatest team in the world, but definitely something you can try out if you want something hilarious. If you can find space for her, she can also just be a general healer for Furina teams, but there's often better characters you can use for this role. I think her biggest downside is that she needs to spend a decent amount of time on field to really take advantage of this healing. And also, Aggravate isn't the most meta team in the world, and the most meta version of Aggravate doesn't actually use Yao Yao. So I think if she weren't so free to play friendly by essentially having her full kit unlocked at C0, it might actually make more sense to put her behind the likes of Charlotte. But I think the fact that you can just grab a copy from Lantern Rite and have a Dendro healer for your Aggravate or for your Nilou team makes her worthy for a spot on this list, as she's just so account efficient. Number 9, Kirara. Hopefully you just got her and her skin for free. That skin looks amazing. Unfortunately, she's not quite as free to play friendly as Yao Yao was, although she is definitely functional at Constellation 0 and you can definitely use her. C4 is where her true power unlocks, as that is where she'll have more consistent off-field Dendro application. Kirara functions in many of the same roles that Yao Yao does, in that Aggravate and Nilou are generally considered her best teams. Although if you do need a shielder for something like Novelette, Kirara can definitely suffice. I'd say the reason she makes it over Yao Yao on this list is that Kirara's peak potential is just a little bit higher, as using her on a shield support for Chlorand actually ends up going pretty much toe-to-toe with Nahida variants, assuming you can fit the instructor set and the sapwood blade. I've seen some people talk about how Kirara's shield can feel a bit weak sometimes, so to make it stronger, you'll want to make sure that you enter her hold version and tag enemies. Each enemy you tag in the hold version strengthens the shield by 20% up to 60%. So even in single target scenarios, just tagging one enemy gives your shield an extra 20% strength boost. So that is pretty nice. Her burst also has quite a bit of dendro application. And while in her catbox state, she also has a decent amount of application. So whether it's a meme Hyperbloom team or an on-fielder in Nilou teams, she can make use of the funny box state. Overall, she's less free to play friendly because of her reliance on C4 to really be a consistent option for a lot of teams. But her high performance on Chlorand, Nilou, and other aggravate teams still give her a pretty high spot on this list. Number 8 is Gaming. Gaming is a character with an extremely high potential. When the Abyss is just right, playing Gaming is a dream. And even if the Abyss is not just right, he's generally strong enough to work regardless. I know there's some RNG involved in waiting for his line to come back so you can get more skills off. And depending on the team, circle impact can go from being a medium issue to absolutely detrimental in terms of in the case of melt. And there's also the fact that he needs his C6 to really pop off and shine. And I think many people just don't even have C6 Gaming, and if you do, you probably haven't raised him since there are a myriad of pyro DPSs. So it's not like you need to rush out and immediately get yourself a Gaming. Plus, his best team requires Farina, Bennett, and Shen, which is a pretty expensive investment. You definitely don't need all three of those, and he has some pretty solid other options. I would say though, even though he has all those drawbacks, the damage is just extremely high, and he still ends up being the best 4-star DPS we have, and a very good DPS 4-star or not. Number 7 is Sucrose. I think Sucrose is a character that most people honestly won't end up using, and I think that's the case of a lot of 4-stars, because 4-stars generally get 5-star versions made to make obviously Hoyoverse more money, and generally the 5-star versions are comfier despite the 4-star versions still being pretty good. Sucrose is definitely this case. Although Taser has fallen off a bit in my opinion, Taser is still a pretty strong team that Sucrose has, although I personally don't recommend or use it myself, but she is a really solid aggravate character. Aggravate I think is just the free-to-play friendly team because so many of its good options are 4-stars, but obviously running VV is very good. If you have her C6, it's actually pretty reliable on aggravate teams to give an electro damage boost. She can hold Hakushin Ring, which is a great electro reaction buffer. So overall, Sucrose is a great aggravate character. She's also a good VV Vape character. I personally like using her for Arlecchino, especially during boss fights. Being able to swirl, provide her EM buff, and of course she provides that for aggravate too, but also providing Thrilling Tales buff is honestly just stupid. And although she's a lot less comfy and easy to play and fun to play than Kazuha, she's still, in my opinion, a very good character and definitely deserves to be very high on this list. If she was comfier to play and easier to play, and Kazuha wasn't so much more of an upgrade in terms of comfort and general utility, I would put Sucrose higher on this list. I also really like the fact that Sucrose really only needs her Constellation 1 to shine, and she has lots of different, very free-to-play friendly weapons. The ones I mentioned are very free-to-play friendly. She also has Sacrificial Fragments. Number 6 is Faruzan. Faruzan is a character that if you don't have her C6, she just doesn't belong on this list at all. I would say that's probably the case for Gaming as well, and maybe a couple others that we'll get to, but Faruzan is definitely the most egregious. She has a few teams, they're all mono animo, so either buffing Wanderer, buffing Zhao, buffing Shen Yun as a DPS, which is actually surprisingly good if you haven't tried it, or buffing a 4-star option like Hazo, which definitely isn't as good. But I think when we look at all these teams, Faruzan C6 is the strongest part of all of those teams. She is the one that brings Wanderer and Zhao up to very good levels of DPS. Without her, they would be one of the more medium DPSs, and with her, I think they're one of the better DPSs. So despite not being all that flexible, and despite being locked to C6, she is ridiculously extremely strong, a must-have for any Animo damage dealing main, providing debuffing, energy, Tenacity of the Millith artifact set, crit damage, Animo damage bonus. It's just an absolutely overtuned kit, and I hope we get more characters like her, but I hope that that when we do, their utility is a bit more spread out and not all locked behind the C6, and it's spread out into the base kit, into some earlier constellations as well. But yeah, if you end up getting a C6 Farazan, absolutely insane character. Only reason she's not higher on this list is because the Anemo DPSs are only so good, right? Zhao and Wanderer are good characters, but they're not absolutely cracked, in my opinion. I know some people would definitely disagree, but her power is somewhat limited by the power of the DPS. If we get an absolutely godlike, like Arlecchino or Novelette level of Anemo DPS in the future, then Farazan stonks will go even higher. Number 5 is Xingqiu, and I know a lot of people are surprised that he's this low on the tier list, but hear me out. And I'm absolutely aware that a lot of comments will be like, no, he's one of the best characters in the game. He's absolutely the best 4-star, etc, etc, etc. And I totally get it. And I think that in a vacuum, I think Xingqiu is really, really, really insane. If you don't look at all of the alternative options that we have to Xingqiu, he is really, really, really good. And even then, versus some of those options, there are times where I will pick Xingqiu over other options, even when they are available. So I still think he's an absolutely great character, really, really good. There are a couple things that hold him back for me on this list. Number 1, he does require his C6 to really, really shine over the other options. He's not like, he has very, very powerful constellation. C4 is very good. If you have low constellation Xingqiu, he's just worse than the likes of Yelan or Furina. And because I consider Yelan and Furina some of the best characters in the game, and some of the characters that I think most people should go for, and Novelette as well, to be honest, he's sort of competing with some of the very best characters in the game. And the amount of wishes that it will take to get a Xingqiu to C6 is honestly less than it will take to get a C0 Novelette or C0 Furina or C0 Yelan. And so while I do think that Xingqiu is very good, his reliance on his C6 and his alternative options to him being so good just take him down. Now, if you already have his C6 and somehow you don't have Novelette, Furina, or Yelan, then he probably does belong higher on the list for your account, because then he can provide as an alternative to other Hydro characters, meaning you don't have to wish on Hydro 5-star characters. But the reality is, with the previous banners, that the way that they've been, there's a good chance that you still have, if you're newer, that you just don't have C6 Xingqiu. You have a C0, C1, C2, and you're better off getting a C0 Yelan, a C0 Furina, and or a C0 Novelette, and you'll probably be able to get that before you can get a C6 Xingqiu. And if you're a veteran, well, you probably have either or a Novelette, Furina, or Yelan, and you're probably not using Xingqiu all that much. When do you use Xingqiu? For me, Arlecchino Vape or Hu Tao, Arlecchino Vape, especially in AoE, there's times when I prefer to have that resistance to interruption and that extra Hydro application to vape more hits in AoE for Arlecchino. Something that Yelan can't do nearly as well. He can be nice on Alhaitham Hyperbloom for some interruption resistance, but I generally do prefer Yelan anyways because it's pretty easy to dodge with Alhaitham. He's not a character that has specific combos that you need to hit. I do use Xingqiu the most for double Hydro Hyperbloom as the extra damage reduction, especially for a character as squishy as Nahida on field, is very, very nice. And the damage reduction in general can be nice for very aggressive parts of the Abyss, but I would say as good as the damage reduction is for aggressive Abysses, the fact that he applies Hydro to you also is a weakness because you can easily get frozen, you can easily get vaporized. And so although he does have defensive positives, he also has some defensive negatives in providing, afflicting yourself with Hydro. Number 4 is Fischl. Fischl is an absolutely insane character. She definitely doesn't have the raw power that some of the very top characters in Genshin Impact do, but she basically is Aggravate. She's one of the strongest options for Chevreuse teams. Although, again, I don't love Taser, she's still good in Taser. She's good in Spread with Alhaitham, a flex for Navia or other DPSs, pretty alright for Hyper Raiden, and overall just an awesome character. She's not as good as I think some people think she is, just because her raw power scalings aren't as high as some of the characters we have now, such as Furina, Yelan, etc. But still, there's no one in her role, so it's kind of like, although she's kind of worse than Xingqiu overall, at least in my opinion, the fact that there aren't really very many alternatives to Fischl just make her sort of a staple must-build kind of character and deserving of the number 4 spot on the list. You've probably realized by listening to the list overall that I consider Aggravate one of the most free-to-play friendly teams that you can build. And as I said before, it can't really be stressed enough that Fischl basically makes Aggravate a team. Her Ascension 4 passive is just absolutely busted when every time an on-field character triggers an electro reaction, Fischl can attack with another coordinated attack, which will aggravate. And that is what makes her so busted. She's best with characters that normal attack, although she still functions otherwise. And of course, her constellations do make her a lot better better. Her C6 definitely adds a lot of damage, especially for, again, characters that can normal attack. But even without it, she is still functional. She provides a great amount of energy to the team. I think her very low duration holds her back a little bit from really shining on every team. But because her uptime is still 100%, as long as your character has some rotational flexibility or very short rotations, that isn't even an issue for the vast majority of teams. Overall, insane character. Number 3 is Xiangling. Very, very similar to Fischl. The raw damage isn't as impressive as some other characters, but there's just no off-field pyro DPS anywhere in the same ballpark as Xiangling. Mono pyro, vaporize, national, the Farina Bennett Xiangling team core, reverse melt, flex spot for Navia, flex spot for many DPSs like Wanderer, Burgeon, Burning. Anything that requires off-field pyro application, Xiangling is really your only option, and she's very good at what she does. She's held back a bit by her ties to Bennett and by her long, really long cooldown that's bad for some characters. Well, she's also gotten new life from Chevreuse and from Wriothesley Melt and Farina being able to buff off-field characters. I do see Xiangling being replaced by the Pyro Archon or some other pyro character in Natlan, but for now, she's still our only source of off-field pyro, and despite her shortcomings, is a ridiculous character. She does need her C4 to actually be really good, but fortunately she's available from Lantern Rite. She's available in the shop, same with Xingqiu, so you should be able to get yourself a high constellation, at least C4 Xiangling before too long. Number 2 is Kuki. Some people may say I'm kooky for having Kuki ahead of Fischl on this list. And maybe I am, to be honest. I think these characters, from Xingqiu to basically the next character on this list, you could interchange any of them. Like if we look at my list here, to me it's something like this, like these characters, any of these you could say are better than any of the other ones for various reasons. Xingqiu in a vacuum might be the best out of all of these. Fischl, you could definitely argue Fischl above Kuki. I think the advantages for Kuki is that she's a role consolidation, Hyperbloom trigger, and healer, and that is just really, really powerful. Despite it not being a crazy amount of healing, she is enough healing to help for Farina teams such as Alhaitham and Farina. She's obviously a staple for Hyperbloom teams, whether it be Alhaitham or Double Hydro Hyperbloom, or even Sino. She's also a great support that can hold the Key of Kajnasut and Instructor's Artifact set that can support Alhaitham on spread teams and be the healer. She's also, weirdly enough, a great character for Novelette teams. A lot of people like her for the additional healing and getting more Electro charge, but not too much Electro like Fischl can provide that ruins your swirl setups. And all on top of that, you don't even need anything past her C2 to have max potential for your Kuki. And so she hasn't been on very many banners, but only requiring her C2 makes her much more accessible. And although you can use other Hyperbloom triggers, such as Chlorand or off-field Raiden, the only other option I really like is Chlorand, because losing the role consolidation of healing for Raiden Hyperbloom, I just don't think is worth it. I don't think that, yeah, she can hit from maybe further away, but I don't think that's really an issue. She does have longer cooldowns, which can be nicer for flexible rotations, but Kuki still has pretty close to 100% uptime, especially if you factor in using her burst. And Raiden's buffing, although good, that she can buff the bursts of the characters with her skill, it doesn't buff the likes of Farina, and it doesn't buff like a lot of Alhaitham's damage. So buffing just burst damage isn't as good as it could be. So yeah, I'm giving Kuki number 2. But if you disagree and you think that Kuki goes behind Xingqiu in like number 6 or whatever that was, that is totally fine. I do not disagree with you. I think all of these characters, and honestly the next character I'm going to say, all deserve the same spot. Number 1 is Chevreuse. Chevreuse basically invented an entirely new archetype. The Pyro Electro meta is one of my favorite archetypes in the game. Chevreuse providing the same debuffing as Kazuha, just at C0, while also providing a pretty sizable attack buff is honestly crazy. And with her C6 providing a huge Electro and Pyro crit damage bonus, it really makes Chevreuse one of the strongest buffers in the game. And she makes up my second favorite team archetype in the game in terms of overall comfortability and ease of use, just behind Novelette, because Novelette has actual grouping. But why I love Chevreuse teams so much is because they don't need to reapply any debuffs when a new wave is starting. Genshin is notorious for these nasty multi-waves and moving across the screen or across the Abyss lineup. With Chevreuse, there's no worries. Her buff follows you everywhere. It follows you into the new wave. The rotations are easy, and there's lots of great Electro and Pyro on-field and off-field characters that you can mix and match to make your favorite Chevreuse team. When merging Comfort and Power, the Clorinde ones are my favorite, but the Arlecchino ones are also crazy strong. The Raiden ones is my favorite Raiden team, and there's lots and lots of other Chevreuse teams that you can do. She is a character that doesn't need her C6 to be great, but does need her C6 to really deserve this spot on the list. I think if you don't have her C6, it's like she's still better than non-C6 Xingqiu in my opinion, and still better than non-C6 Fischl. But if you're comparing C4, then she would probably go behind Xiangling, but whatever. Just know she's good at C0, great at C6. Obviously, her biggest downside is that you can't use non-Pyro or Electro characters. If you want to get her max damage, you can actually still use her with teams that don't use Pyro and Electro as long as you trigger an overload. There's just certain parts of her buffs that you don't get. But yeah, I really like Chevreuse. And finally, number 0 is Bennett. You thought you had me there. You thought Bennett is, in my opinion, the only tier 0 character on this list, hence number 0. And he's also not technically a 4-star. He's actually a 6-star. See, look, below his name, Bennett, 6-star, right there. You can see it. No, all jokes aside, Bennett is a crazy character. And while I do agree that he has fallen off in the sense that some teams don't need him, there's lots of other options these days. Circle Impact is cringe. Applying Pyro to yourself is cringe. I'm totally on board, right? I'm totally on board. Bennett, he needs a replacement real bad. Power Archon, please save us. He's clunky to use. He's annoying to use for a lot of teams. Moving across the Abyss screen is really annoying. You don't always get his full buff. I get it. He's still the best 4-star in the game, even with all of that. The attack buff he gives is absolutely crazy. The fact that he heals is absolutely crazy. Almost all attack scaling characters want Bennett as part of their best team. And despite so many other options coming out, Farina still needs a healer. And Bennett is good enough to be your Farina healer. You might have to build Bennett with more HP. You might have to adjust your rotations a little bit, but the team is absolutely cracked. Arlecchino, Linny, even Hu Tao, they want Bennett. I do hope that we get a Bennett replacement soon because his quality of life is just not there. Like, it's really not. But I still think the amount of teams that he's best in slot for and the power level of those teams because of him and the downgrade that characters like Arlecchino or Navia or whoever take when they're trying to use other options still put him as the number 0 spot on this top 11, technically 12 list of 4-star characters. Add to all of that he only needs his C1 to maximize the buff. That's pretty darn awesome. And if you do end up with C5, C6, then that further amplifies it even more, but they're not necessary constellations to getting the max out of him. Plus, he's available for free from the Star Glitter shop, so he's very free to play friendly. Great synergy with Kazuha. Overall, number 0. I've been making a lot of these types of list videos. Check out this video for the best character of every element, where I greatly overvalue the Imaginarium Theater and make the video a little bit more confusing than it needs, or my top 5 personal favorite teams for Genshin Impact, my personal ranking for the top 5 teams in Genshin Impact. Check that out right there. Take care. Bye for now.